Hi, boys and girls. It's me, Miss Scott. And we have started reading the book, Little House in the Big Woods. And when we last left off, Laura's dad, Pa had chased away a bear that was coming after their pig. And Pa said, I saved the bacon. So I'm excited to get started. We're going to start right here where it says, the garden behind the house had been growing all summer. It was so near the house that the deer did not jump the fence and eat the vegetables in the daytime. And at night, Jack kept them away. Sometimes in the morning, there were little hoof prints among the carrots and the cabbage, but Jack's tracks were there too, and the deer had jumped right out again. Now the potatoes and the carrots and the beets and the turnips and the cabbage were gathered and stored in the cellar, for freezing nights had come. Onions were made into long ropes braided together by their tops, and then were hung in the attic beside wethers of red peppers strung to threads. The pumpkins and the squash were piled in orange and yellow and green heaps in the attic's corner. The barrels of salted fish were in the pantry, and yellow cheese were stacked on the pantry shelves. Then one day, Uncle Henry came riding out of the big woods. He had come to help Pa butcher. Ma's big butchering knife had already been sharpened, and Uncle Henry had brought Aunt Polly's butcher knife. Near the pig pen, Pa and Uncle Henry built a bonfire and heaped a great kettle of water on it. When the water was boiling, they went to kill the hog. Then Laura ran and hid her head on the bed and stopped up her ears with her fingers so that she could not hear the hog's squeals. It doesn't hurt him, Laura, Pa says. We do it so quickly. But she did not want to hear him squeal. In a minute, she took one finger cautiously out of an ear and listened. The hog had stopped squealing. After that, butchering time was great fun. It was such a busy day with so much to see and do. Uncle Henry and Pa were jolly. There would be spare ribs for dinner. And Pa had promised Laura and Mary the bladder of the pig's tail. As soon as the hog was dead, Pa and Uncle Henry lifted it up and down in the boiling water till it was well scalded. Then they laid it on a board and scraped it with their knives, and all the bristles came off. After that, they hung the hog in the tree, took out the insides, and left it hanging to cool. When it was cool, they took it down and cut it up. There were hams and shoulders, side meat, and spare ribs and belly. There was a heart and liver and the tongue and the head to be made into head cheese, and the dishpan full of bits and pieces that would be made into sausage. The meat was laid on a board in the back door shed, and every piece was sprinkled with salt. The hams and the shoulders were put to pickle in brine, for they would be smoked, like the venison in the hollow tree. You can't beat hickory-cured ham, Pa said. He was blowing up the bladder. It made a little white balloon, and he tied the end of it with a string and gave it to Mary and Laura to play with. They would throw it into the air and swatted it back and forth with their hands. Or it would bounce along the ground and they would kick at it. But even better fun than a balloon was the pig's tail. Pa skinned it for them carefully, and into the large end he thrust the sharpened stick. Ma opened the front of the cook stove and raked the hot coals out onto the iron hearth. Then Laura and Mary took turns holding the pig's tail over the coals. It sizzled and fried, and drops of fat dripped off it and blazed on the coals. Ma sprinkled it with salt. Their hands and their faces got very hot, and Laura burnt her little fingers, but she was so excited she did not care. Roasting the pig's tail was such fun that it was hard to play fair, taking turns. Picture. There's the girls playing with the pig's bladder. They turned it into a ball. At last it was done. It was nicely browned all over, and how good it smelled. They carried it into the yard and to cool it, and even before it was cool enough, they began tasting it and burned their tongues. They ate every little bit of the meat off the bones, and when they gave the bones to Jack, and that was the end of that pig's tail, there would not be another one till next year. Uncle Henry went home after dinner, and Pa went away to his work in the big woods. But for Laura and Mary and Ma, butchering time had only begun. There was a great deal for Ma to do, and Laura and Mary helped her. All that day and the next, Ma was trying out the lard in the big iron pots on the cook stove. Laura and Mary carried wood and watched the fire. It must be hot, but not too hot, or the lard would burn. The big pots simmered and boiled, but they must not smoke. For time to time, Ma skimmed out the brown cracklings. She put them in the cloth and squeezed out every bit of the lard, and then she put the cracklings away. She would use them to flavor Johnny cakes later. Cracklings are like little bitty pieces of bacon. When you've cooked up the bacon, it has these little bitty chunks of meat. That's what the cracklings were. And a Johnny cake is kind of like a little corn cake, like a pancake. It's a Johnny cake. Cracklings, Johnny cakes. Okay. Cracklings were very good to eat, but Laura and Mary could have only a taste. They were too rich for little girls, Ma said. Ma scraped and cleaned the head carefully, and then she boiled it until all of the meat fell off of the bones. She chopped the meat fine with her chopping knife in the wooden bowls. She seasoned it with pepper and salt and spices. Then she mixed the pot liquor with it and set it away in the pan to cool. When it was cool, it would cut in slices, and that was the head cheese. The little pieces of meat laying in the fat that had been cut off the large pieces, Ma chopped and chopped until it was all chopped fine. She seasoned it with salt and pepper and with dried sage leaves from the garden. Then with her hands, she tossed and turned it until it was well mixed, and she molded it into a ball. She put the ball in a pan out in the shed where they would freeze and be good to eat all winter. That was the sausage. When the butchering time was over, there were sausages and head cheese and big jars of lard and kegs of white salted pork out in the shed, and in the attic hung the smoked hams and the shoulders. The little house was fairly bustling with good food stored away for a long winter. The pantry and the shed and the cellar were full, and so was the attic. Laura and Mary must play in the house now, for it was cold outdoors, and the brown leaves were all falling off of the trees. The fire in the cook stove never went out. At night, Pa baked it with ashes to keep the coals alive until morning. Picture. There's Laura and Mary playing with their dolls inside because fall has come and winter is soon to be there. And we turn the page and here's another picture. This is a picture of Laura and her paw. The attic was a lovely place to play. A large, round, colored pumpkins made a beautiful chair and a table. The red peppers and the onions dangled overhead, and the ham and the venison hung in their paper wrappings, and all the bunches of dried herbs and spices, herbs for the cooking and the bitter herbs for medicine, gave the place a dusty, spicy smell. Often the wind howled outside with the cold and the lonely sounds, but in the attic, Laura and Mary played house with the squashes and the pumpkins, and everything was snug and cozy. Mary was bigger than Laura, and she had a rag doll named Nettie. Laura had only a corn cob wrapped in a handkerchief, but it was a good doll. It was named Susan. It wasn't Susan's fault that she was only a corn cob. Sometimes Mary let Laura hold Nettie, but she did not. She did it only when Susan couldn't see. The best times of all were at night. After supper, Pa brought his traps in from the shed to grease them by the fire. He rubbed them brightly with grease and greased the hinges of the jaws and springs and the pans with the feathers dipped in bear grease. There were small traps and medium-sized traps and great bear traps with teeth in their jaws that Pa said would break a man's leg if they shut on it. While he greased the traps, Pa told Laura and Mary little jokes and stories, and afterward he would play the fiddle. The doors and the windows were tightly shut, and the cracks of the window frames stuffed with cloth to keep out the cold. But Black Susan, the cat, came and went as she pleased, day and night, through the swinging door of the cat hole in the bottom of the front door. She always went very quickly, so the door would not catch her tail when it fell shut behind her. One night, when Pa was greasing the traps, he watched Black Susan come in and he said, "There was once a man who had 2 cats, a big cat and a little cat." Laura and Mary ran to lean on his knee and hear the rest. "He had 2 cats," Pa repeated, "a big cat and a little cat. So he made a big cat hole in his door for the big cat, and then he made a little cat door for the little cat." Their Pa stopped. But why can't the little cat?" Mary began. Because the big cat wouldn't let it," Laura interrupted. "Laura, that is very rude. You must never interrupt," said Pa. "But I see," he said, "that either one of you has more sense than the man who cut the 2 cat holes in his door." Then he laid away the traps and he took his fiddle out of its box and began to play. That was the best time of all. That's the end of chapter 2, boys and girls. I just wanted to send some love to all my friends. I want to say hi to Riley and Jonathan and Alyssa and Destiny. You guys, I miss you. Love you. Bye.